So what we want to do is cultivate cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out. So what we want to do is cultivate cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out. So what we want to do is cultivate cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out. Hello, chat. How's everybody doing today? Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I am a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is for educational and entertainment purposes only. So if y'all have a concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. I'm doing well, BanGOB. How are you? How are y'all doing today? So I'm super excited today. Today is Juneteenth. So this is the celebration of the emancipation of the African slaves in the U.S. It's now a federal holiday. Happy Juneteenth, everyone. We're going to just talk about this for just a minute. And we could talk about it for a long time, but we're going to focus on it for a minute now. So just a couple of stories for y'all. So even though we've come a long way in terms of resolving racial inequalities and inequities, I think unfortunately racism is still, or systemic discrimination and systemic racism is still a huge problem. I know that this sounds like a political statement, right? So it's like, oh, like how bad is racism? No, it's fine. Everyone's equal. Everyone has the same opportunity. Like, I know it's a political thing, but I'm not really talking about politics. So what I'm talking about is more from like a medical standpoint. So just to give you all an example, maternal mortality, I think, is 2 to 3 times as bad for Black women in the United States as it is for Caucasian women. I'm not 100% sure about that statistic, but I think it's pretty accurate based on my last looking at this stuff, which was around 2015, 2016. So if you look at, I don't think there's any dispute in the medical community that being born of a certain ethnicity correlates with poorer health outcomes. And it's not like genetic in nature, right? So there may be some things that are genetic. So we do know that, for example, like Ashkenazi Jews are prone to particular problems. People of South Asian descent are prone to particular problems. People of African descent are prone to particular problems. So we know that there are genetic variabilities, but the genetic variability does not account for the drastic alterations in health outcomes. And what we tend to find is that minorities that have low socioeconomic status tend to do worse. So diabetes is worse, heart disease is worse, mental health care is something where there's a huge disparity. Just as an example, so I worked in residency as part of my forensic rotation. I worked at a jail, and I didn't go to the jail every single day, so I still had my clinic at Mass General and stuff like that, but I worked at the jail. And I remember on my 3rd week, I was at the jail and I realized, wait, something is different about this patient that I saw. What is it? What's going on here? And then I realized that it took me 3 weeks to see someone who is not Black and not Latino. It was on my 3rd week of my jail rotation that I saw the first Caucasian person. And so contrast that to my clinic at Mass General. I went and I looked back through some of my records. So out of my initial 30 patients at Mass General Hospital, which is, according to US News and World Report, the best hospital in the country basically every other year, especially for psychiatry. So it tends to be like Mass General and McLean keep on switching. But out of my first 30 patients that I got in my clinic at Mass General Hospital, 28 of them were Caucasian. 2 of them were Latino. Didn't have a single Black patient in my first 30 patients that I saw there in terms of my outpatient clinic. And so, like, you know, I think that we've done a lot to fix this problem, and we have a long way to go. And if you work in medicine, I think that this is something that's basically like not disputed, right? So we know there's tons of research about health inequities. We were lucky enough to attend the Mental Health Youth Summit in California last week, last Monday and Tuesday. And that was put on by the California Endowment, which is a fantastic organization that's dedicated to providing like social grants for resolving health inequities and sort of the intersection of race and health. We also see this a lot, not just in the African American or the Black community or the Latino community. There's also all kinds of specific health problems that happen within other communities as well. So even if you look at like, so Scandinavian mental health is a little bit different. And so these are people who are Caucasian as well. Being South Asian, there's a ton of work that needs to be done, especially around East Asian mental health, South Asian mental health, and Southeast Asian mental health. So these are kind of situations where culturally, like, we don't have conceptions of mental health that are culturally kind of acceptable. The stigma is very, very high. There's also this like model minority myth, which is that, you know, all Asians are good at math and these kinds of statements, which aren't true. So if you're a kid who grows up like being Asian and like you're not good at math, then everyone's like, wait, you're not good at math? That's crazy. And so there's all kinds of racial discrimination that sort of goes on. And like, you know, there's a lot left to do. It's certainly not my area of expertise. I have tons of colleagues and stuff who are like very, very knowledgeable about this kind of stuff. I can talk about it some. I can share some of my own experiences and things like that. And I've, of course, dealt with the racial impacts of mental health with tons of my patients. I just wanted to say, for those of you out there, first of all, happy Juneteenth. And secondly, if you are in a situation where, you know, you're struggling in terms of mental health or physical health, and you're struggling in terms of discrimination and stuff, my heart goes out to you. I'm hopeful that things will continue to get better. I do think things are getting better, but I think we have a long way to go. And the last thing, the other reason that I think it's really, really, really important to acknowledge these problems, and we'll talk about this a little bit more today, is that oftentimes when you really struggle with something like depression, and I tend to see this more in the Asian American or South Asian American community, also especially within the Nigerian diaspora, but when you struggle with mental health and it's not culturally appropriate, right? So like, for example, the number one cause of death for Asian Americans between the ages of 18 and 24 is actually like suicide. So the most dangerous thing to you if you are an Asian American between the ages of 18 and 24 is yourself. That's the most likely thing to kill you. And the reason that acknowledging these disparities is very, very important is because when you're in that state of mind, the first thing that you blame is yourself. You feel broken, you feel messed up, you feel incapable, you feel lazy, you feel like you screwed everything up. Whereas the truth of the matter is that there are tons of influences that determine your health state, even your success, that have nothing to do with your personal mettle, your discipline, your laziness, your motivation, or any of that kind of stuff. And so that's why I think it's really, really important to like acknowledge, especially these healthcare disparities. I'm especially not an expert in other kinds of disparities in terms of financial inequities and stuff like that. Like, that's not something that I know the research on or feel confident to comment on. And so I can't really do that. But, I think especially like if you're in that situation, if you are a minority and like you're blaming yourself for everything in life, I think it's important to acknowledge, distribute that blame a little bit. It's not even really about blame. It's about sort of acknowledging what you can control in life and what you can't control. And oftentimes the really shocking thing about some of these racial disparities is that since you grow up with it all the time, it becomes normal to you. And that's something that I certainly remember. So I grew up experiencing a lot of anti-Hindu sentiment. So this was religious discrimination because I grew up in Texas, and like people like beef, and the cow is considered sacred in the Hindu tradition. And so like there's all kinds, and I just thought that was normal, right? So I was one of the 5 Indian kids in my city. Like a population of 100,000 people, there's like 5 Indian kids who were my age. And it's just something that we all dealt with. It was like normal. It's normal. And that's what's really unfortunate, is that it becomes so normalized. And so like, especially when it comes to things like mental health and physical health, if you're on the struggle bus a little bit and you are a minority, I think it's important to acknowledge that the hand of cards that you were dealt may not have been optimal. Now, the interesting thing when we make a statement like that is some people will fill in the gap, which I need to kind of acknowledge. It doesn't mean that. So the same can also be true of people who are Caucasian, right? So we don't know the ethnicities of the people who posted on subreddits, but generally speaking, like just because if you're Caucasian and you're struggling with your mental health, it also doesn't have to be entirely your fault. There can also be, in fact, most of the time it's not. And we'll sort of get into that today about the research of sort of how we develop into psychiatric problems. So I'm not saying that this is exclusive to people who are minorities, but what we do know from broad scale population-based studies is that some minorities fare worse than others, and that some minorities do fare worse than the majority. It doesn't mean, though, that like people in the majority don't deserve help and don't need help and are to blame for all of their circumstances. It's just, it seems to be lopsided. So I just wanted to acknowledge that for a little bit. And then, if this is something that's more interesting to y'all, we can definitely have more conversations about it. We've talked, we've had interviews and stuff with creators who are racially a minority, more about their experiences in gaming, which is a whole other thing. But happy Juneteenth, everyone. We've gone a long way and we have a long way to go. Okay. Yeah, so I know I made this comment about Scandinavia. So like I think the other thing that's important to remember, right, is like not all Caucasians are the same. So like if you look at in each sort of ethnicity, each country has its own mental health challenges. And if we look at things comparatively, like I would guess that mental health services and access in Europe are better than they are in Africa. But just because on the whole they're better in Europe than they are in Africa does not mean that there aren't a lot of people who get screwed in Europe in terms of like access to care and things like that. So, okay, also Scandinavians are not Caucasians. Thank you for correcting me, Stealthy Manatee. Pretty crazy. Are you ever going to do any LGBTQ content for Pride? Yeah, absolutely. But we're just putting it together properly. Gray Eye 3 is asking, could you go into why I feel less anxious and emotional when I sleep less? Yeah, we can go into that. So we're going to start actually with a couple of different things. People say so. I'm not an expert in this kind of stuff, so I'll defer to the community. So the first thing that we're going to do, let's do a poll. Mod check. So we've got 4 things we want to cover today. We're going to try to get to them all. We may not. So let's take a look at some of these. And then y'all can decide what we're talking about, okay? So I'm ashamed to say it, but I feel like I'm turning into a bitter, hateful incel, and I need some help. So if we cover this, what we're going to talk about is we're going to share some of the conclusions from our research. So we have a paper is under review for publication right now about how an incel is born. So I'd love to share with y'all, like literally the development of where you start in life, what happens early on in the lives of incels, how their personality is shaped, how their upbringing is shaped, and then ultimately like how you become an incel. So this is something that we've been kind of interested in because everyone sort of people talk about incels and stuff, especially with relating to mass shooting and stuff. And we don't really understand what's going on. So we did a lot of research on this so we can share that with you if y'all are interested. My boyfriend lost hope in life, is either gaming or sleeping, and refuses to go to get therapy. He isn't the man that I met, and I'm at a loss. So this post is really, really challenging because a lot of times we're in a relationship with someone that we love. And when this person starts to struggle, at least even perhaps in terms of depression, maybe gaming messes up their kind of sleep schedule and stuff, and then like refuses, you want them to, you see them struggling, they see themselves struggling and they refuse to get help, then you're kind of like stuck, right? Because like, do you push them? Do you not push them? Do you wait around? Do you not wait around? Do you break up with them? Do you break up with them because they got depressed and that makes you feel guilty? So we're going to talk a little bit through what it's like to be in a relationship with someone who's struggling and like what you can do about it. Third thing is I don't have a life. So we're going to talk a little bit. This is a post from a 24-year-old woman. I think a lot of times when we have these posts about, I'm going nowhere in life, they tend to be oftentimes men. I think this is changing rapidly in our community. But this is just a case of a 24-year-old woman who's a high school dropout, doesn't have a job, doesn't have friends. And how can you start tackling this issue? Then the last thing that we can cover is, do you have moments of your true potential? So this actually comes from the ADHD subreddit. But this is, there are cases where people with ADHD, like the stars align and they go into this special mode where they're like, their mind is working properly, they're confident, their anxiety is better, and they're just everything clicks and they tend to do better. So what do y'all want to talk about today? 4 options are developmental trajectory of an incel, managing relationships with someone who's struggling to put together a life, and where do you start? And what was the 4th thing? Oh yeah, ADHD and sort of capturing those moments. Okay, great. We'll start with I don't have a life. Let's do it. Okay. Okay, so this is going to be kind of weird, all right? So let's get started. So, I don't have a life. Warning, this text probably the most pathetic thing you've ever read. I'm a 24-year-old woman. I'm a high school dropout. I don't have a job. I don't have any friends. I never had a relationship and all that. Loneliness is indescribable. I've always felt out of place. And I've always been a weird kid. I wasn't the brightest in the school. I used to skip school for months. I just waited until my parents went to work and then came back home and spent time in my room. I basically wasted all my life being isolated, stuck inside my room due to my depression and severe social anxiety, and I was just indifferent about my future. Although I did have some plans or whatever, but that was stupid. I don't have good memories. I have never had some amazing adventures with my friends. I wasn't happy and I'm unhappy now. All I do every day is just scroll the internet or watch dumb videos. Nothing happens in my life. I tried to find a job, but I usually just chicken out and go back to my room, trying to escape sheer anxiety. My family is so upset with me. I don't even want to start with this one. I don't see a future for myself. I did go to a therapist. She gave me antidepressants and told me to find a job, but I'm still rotting in my room. I don't know what's wrong with me. It's not a life. I feel so hopeless and defeated. I don't think I'll ever catch up on life. And the most painful thing is that I'm actually a fun person and there are things I'd love to do. I want to see places. I want to travel. I want to have a healthy social life. I want to have a life, but I simply can't do even a small step. So sometimes we find ourselves in a situation where we're in our 20s and we've got nothing going for us. High school dropout, didn't even finish school, don't have a job, don't have friends, never had a relationship. So romance isn't working well. Professions isn't going well. Academics aren't going well. And furthermore, our health isn't good, right? Because there's like crippling depression and anxiety, like really bad anxiety. And so we find ourselves in this situation where like nothing's going our way. There's like literally not a single point of light in our life. And we're 24. We realize this. And like, we don't even know like where to start. Like, where do you even start in this kind of situation? And this is what's like especially crippling about this is that if we look at this, what's the tone, right? Like, who do you think this person blames? Who is to blame here? I simply can't do one step. We feel defeated. And the challenge here is that sometimes when we're in this situation, like we have depression and anxiety, the internet or people will tell us, like myself included, go get therapy, right? So we'll say like, oh, like this is a problem. Like, what's the diagnosis here? You're depressed. Oh, right. So you due to depression and anxiety. Okay, great. Go to therapy. And then we do that. And you get antidepressants and you're told to find a job and then you're still rotting in your room. So like the challenge here is that when you're faced with this situation, like there are some things that are supposed to be the right answer. And what on earth do you do if you do the right answer and it still doesn't work? Like then what? Then the real hopelessness sets in, right? Then it's like, then I want y'all to think about what effect this has on the mind. If someone tells you, oh, look, this is the right answer, like you need to go see a therapist and find medication. You go to a therapist, you find medication, you do the right thing, and it still doesn't work. Who's to blame? Even more you, right? Because this works for so many people. Therapy and antidepressants help people who are depressed, but they don't help me. So now you're like SOL, right? Like now it's like, now you're busted on such a fundamental level that even like medical professionals aren't able to help you. And so when you're faced in this situation, you're kind of screwed. Like you don't even you don't know where to start. You don't know how to make friends. You don't have social skills. You don't know how to like put together a resume. Like you haven't even finished school. And then what's really painful about this is that despite the fact that you're struggling with all this stuff, you still want what life has to offer. Right? Like you recognize that life is supposed to be more than this. You want to have a healthy social life. You want to have a relationship. You want to travel. You want to do fun things. You want to do more than just spend all day on the internet. But where on earth do you even start? And it can feel so overwhelming. Like it's a really challenging problem to solve. But if you're going to therapy and you're getting antidepressants anyway and you're still stuck, then it really feels bad. So this is where, like, if we really want to understand this, we've got to kind of start at the top. So the first thing, we're going to share a little bit of research, okay? First thing to understand is that if you are defeated in your mind, the chances of success are going to be very low, right? So like basically, like it's been my experience that you fail when you give up. That's the most important variable in terms of whether you succeed or you fail. Now, what does success mean? What does failure mean? Like that's a whole separate philosophical question. But in essence, if you give up, then it's very hard to win. Now, the challenge is that telling you that doesn't actually fix anything, right? Actually, if you pay attention, what happens is you blame yourself even more because, oh, all I have to do is hope. And if I could hope, then I would be successful. But busted me, I can't even hope. My despair is so bad, like I can't even hope. I can't be motivated. I can't stay positive, like, because I'm so busted, I can't even do that, right? So like, do you see how like no matter what we say, like you're always going to be the problem? Like it's always going to be a deficiency in you. That's what your mind is going to tell you. That's what we have to get rid of. Now, if I tell you have to get rid of it, then you can't get rid of it. Just get rid of it, right? Just have a positive mindset. And it doesn't work for you, then you despair even further. So what on earth is going on? Like, how do we get out of this? You'll see this. It's like a really tricky thing that the mind does. So let's understand a couple of things. So I'm going to ask y'all a question. What has to happen for a child to drop out of high school? Right? Like, look at this. I just waited until my parents, I used to skip school for months. What has to be possible for a child to skip school? No, bullying doesn't work. Bullying is not what allows a child to drop out. Lack of support. Right? So like, I don't know. I mean, like I don't know if this applies to y'all. I don't know. It depends on your upbringing, but this should tell you the difference. There's no way that I would have been able to drop out. There's no friggin' way that my parents would have allowed me to drop out of school. So the first thing to understand is that if you're going nowhere in life, you've got to start by distributing the responsibility and really attributing stuff to where it belongs. So I'm going to give you guys just a simple example of this. If I accept all of the blame for everything in my life on me, let's acknowledge for a moment that like there's got to be some stuff that I can't control, right? But when I accept responsibility for that, I'm accepting responsibility for something that I have no control over, therefore am doomed to failure. Like, you know, if I accept responsibility for the fact that there's only one moon in the sky, I'm setting myself up for despair and failure because I'm fundamentally, there are things in your life that you can control and things in your life that you can't control. And the first thing to understand if you are in a despairing mindset is actually like correctly attributing where the blame goes. Because then what happens, instead of blaming yourself for everything, you're only going to blame yourself for what you're truly responsible for. So this is a kind of situation where if you're abusive to yourself, you have to learn like self-love. And what's the first step of learning self-love? The first step of learning self-love is like acknowledging that other people may have had a hand in this too. Because if you're beating yourself, if you're snatching away all of the mistakes of other people and taking them, oh no, it's all me, it's all me, it's all me, it's all me. My parents aren't responsible at all. If you're snatching away all of that responsibility, it's going to like elevate your despair, right? Because then you've screwed up your life in so many different dimensions. So the first thing to recognize is that, you know, if you skipped school for months, like, how did your parents let you do that? If you dropped out of high school, like, you can't drop out of high school without your parents being okay with it in some way. And that's just the start of it. Second thing to consider is like, how many friends did you have growing up? What did your parents teach you about meeting new people and making new friends? Did they teach you how to make friends? Did they demonstrate how to make friends? Did you all go and socialize as a family with other people and meet new families? Did you meet new kids? Right? So you look at the rest of the world and you look at all the people who are the haves, and you're a have-not. And I think what we don't realize, we attribute these things to like motivation. But the truth of the matter is, like, how does a human being learn anything? It's through like observation. Even the language that I'm using, how did you learn to speak English? Like, you didn't try, like, people around you just started speaking English. Well, maybe English is your second language because we have a large international audience, but take your language of choice, right? Spanish, Dutch, whatever. And so, like, we just learn this kind of stuff. And this is the thing that that a lot of people don't realize is, like, social skills, even things like discipline, waking up on time, showering every day, and things like that, we're taught, right? This kind of behavior is modeled for us. It's part of the reason why religion is so, like, inherited, right? So, like, if you grow up in a particular religion, if you have, you know, if your entire social circle are Southern Baptists, and you grow up in that household, you don't have a random chance to end up as any religion. It's not like the all random mode in a video game. Like, you're going to grow up Southern Baptist, a decent chance, right? You're not going to grow up Baha'i. So this is where the first thing that you've got to realize is that a lot of the things that you struggle with are things that people are explicitly taught or modeled. One of those two things. So was there good modeling about forming new relationships? Did your parents expose you to new social situations and new people? Did you go to parties with people that you didn't know? Did you go to barbecues? Did you go to picnics? Did you go to church events? Did you go to these things where you met new kinds of people? Did they show you? Did your dad or mom, meet people? And then because I remember this happened for me, right? So we used to travel a lot growing up, and I saw my dad make small talk with people. He would make small talk with randos, right? And I would feel super awkward, and he'd be like, "This is my son." I'd say hi. I'd feel super awkward, but I saw him do it over and over and over again. And then sometimes the parent, the person that I was talking to would interact with me. So there's all kinds of stuff that we're supposed to be taught. Like, how do you put together a resume? How do you apply for a job? Even think about your own parents. And did your parents, were they sort of professionally motivated? Did they go through a series of negotiations when they got a job offer? How many jobs did they consider? How often did they move jobs? Were you taught, was it intrinsic in your household that if a job is not good, you should go search for something better? There are all kinds of things that we are instilled with. And this is why you get sort of I went to medical school. I want to say 20% or higher, 30%, 40% of my class in medical school had at least one parent who was a doctor. Do you think we're genetically better at medicine? Of course not. There's no such thing. It's all upbringing. So the first thing that you've got to do is acknowledge that all of this isn't your fault. Not all of it. Are you responsible for some of it? Sure. But especially if you were 6 years old and you didn't have any friends, that has nothing to do with you. That has everything to do with your circumstances. Every year that goes by, you take a little bit more responsibility and a little bit more responsibility. But even then, the people who have a vivid social life at the age of 24 were the ones who were taught how to socialize and modeled socialization. Right? So if you weren't taught those things, it's like you're blaming yourself for not speaking English, and you grew up in India or Sri Lanka, where there's no one speaking English, and then you're beating yourself up for not speaking English. The problem is that we don't really think about this, right? So especially when depression starts to kick in, it inflates self-blame. So what does this do? So the first thing is that if you can actually go through this and acknowledge this for yourself, it's going to change the way that you talk to yourself. And this is where there's one or two things that I kind of want to point out to y'all, but my family is so upset with me. So I don't even want to start with this one. So this is the kind of thing where sometimes we have to be super careful because our family will teach us our self-talk. Where do we get our self-talk? We get it from the way that we're talked to. So if your family blames you for this situation, if your family is you need to just fix it, just fix it, just fix it, just fix it, without how can we help, that's very, very dangerous. So what you've got to essentially do is start by acknowledging that all of this isn't your fault. Is some of it your fault? Absolutely. But if you weren't taught how to make friends, if you were allowed to drop out of high school, that in turn, going to high school is where you start to self-regulate in terms of sleep, going to sleep on time, making your assignments get done by a particular time. It's where you learn how to be an efficient procrastinator. You learn all these things. You're forced to learn these things through high school. And if you don't have that opportunity, your brain just isn't put through that exercise regimen. And you're not going to learn some of these fundamental skills. Right? Because the whole point of high school is they force you to do it. Book reports aren't optional. The book report's due on Friday. You got to do it. You start on Thursday at 2 p.m. Sure, you read through the book, you get the cliff notes, and then you start writing at 10 p.m., and then you finish at 2 a.m. and you turn it in the next day. That's how you learn how to do a decent minimal kind of job. That's a very important skill at life, right? Is being able to do good enough. And if you were deprived of these opportunities, if there wasn't enough parental structure and support for you to go to school, then you're not going to learn this stuff. It's not like if you think about human beings, human beings aren't born with the instinct of productivity. Animals are born with the ability to instinctually swim and run and stuff like that. You give birth to an impala on the Serengeti, and the impala knows how to run. It's out of the womb for 30 seconds and it's running. Human beings, we're not taught, like we have to be taught this stuff. Like a 6-month-old isn't capable of anything. It can't put together a schedule. It doesn't know how to go to work on time. It doesn't know like how to set healthy technology. Like think about it. It's completely, it can't even feed itself. And so the whole point is that all this crap that we assume is intrinsic about human beings is not actually intrinsic. It's taught. Once you realize that, you don't deserve quite as much blame as you give yourself. That's a really important piece. And once you realize that sure, some of this is my fault, but a lot of it isn't, then your self-talk can change, right? Did I do a bad job? Yes. But let's be honest, I kind of did okay, but I was dealt a crappy hand of cards in life. Once you're able to say that to yourself, that's where forgiveness comes in. The ability to forgive yourself. And once you start to forgive yourself, once you start to cut yourself some slack, and once you start to put less pressure on yourself, then a lot of things can change. And this is where I want to just show you all, kind of flash to another post real quick. Dr. K, what exactly what actions do I take to change my life? And this is where we get caught up in the actions, right? I would like to change the following: not having friends, not being independent, staying shy, not having freedom, being in the house, etc., etc. Not having much power. Oh, my parents being controlling. Exactly what actions do I take to change these? Most people would say just get a hobby or go out, but what if I'm terrified of it? This is the key thing. Logically, I know it won't be that terrifying, but I just can't do it. The problem here is not what actions you take. The problem here is the mind that takes the actions. So when you look at your life and nothing is going well, you don't have friends, you don't have a job, you just dropped out of high school, you've never been in a relationship. Fixing each and every one of these problems is absolutely overwhelming. You get like, how are you supposed to catch up? Can't. So what do you actually do about it? What you've got to do is change your mind, change your thinking. How do you change your thinking? That's what we just walked through. So oddly enough, the first step is blame. So depression is anger turned against the self. That's a very old, I think, Freudian conception of depression. All of your anger is directed, you pull it away from your parents and you all point it in here. So now, first thing that you've got to do is like, accountability needs to be like more evenly spread, because you're not responsible for everything. Like, it's crazy. Like, you can't be responsible for everything in your life. Dropping out of high school only happens with parental support. They have to allow it. Being able to skip school for months, like what? There was never a parent-teacher conference. They didn't see your grades. They didn't like realize. They never asked you, how's your homework going? You know, parents have to be, and that too may not necessarily have been their fault, in the sense that if they had to work or had other kinds of problems or had health issues or whatever, like, we're not necessarily blaming them for them. We're not blaming in terms of like, you did this to me. So we're not sort of saying you need to be resentful and angry and stuff like that. We just need to acknowledge that sometimes like crap happens in life, and that's because there's a confluence of events where something kind of slips through the cracks. And if your parents were too busy to do this stuff, or if they were never taught how to do this stuff and they had to kind of muddle through and struggle and stuff like that, that's actually all okay too. But it ain't your fault. So the first thing is a distribution of responsibility, acknowledging that not everything in your life is actually your fault. And once you start to do that, you can start to change a little bit of your despair. You can change the way that you think. You can change the way that you talk to yourself and about yourself. Because then, if you were never taught social skills, suddenly, if you go out and you try to socialize and you literally don't know what to say, it's not because you're stupid. It's because like, hey, you don't know how to play the game of socialization. Maybe that's because you never had the tutorial. It's like some of us are playing life as if we're playing the Elden Ring enemy randomizer, and we've never played a video game in our life. Like, no, there's no tutorial. We're just dropped in. Because remember that life is more like the enemy randomizer. Like, it's not crafted for us to do level 1 and then level 2 and level 3 level. It's not crafted for us to succeed like a video game. It's just RNG. And sometimes, like, the first person that you date is a level 100 narcissist. It's not like life gives you the level 1 narcissist first so that you learn how to deal with them, and then the level 2, and then the level 3, and then the level 4, and the level 5, and then eventually you can deal with the level 100 narcissist. That's not how it works. It's like RNG. So you've got to like cut yourself some slack. Acknowledge that if you struggle, is there more you can do? 100%. But were you taught how to socialize? As you had social difficulties, or when you dropped out of high school, did your parents ever come and talk to you about it and be like, hey, now that you've dropped out of high school, we should probably do something to make sure you get your social activity and you can continue to make friends? Right? So I see this with parents who homeschool, where they'll like intentionally and actively enroll their kids in extracurricular activities because they acknowledge if they homeschool, they're not going to get any social development. So we've got to make sure we do that. As you start to change the way that you think about yourself and the way that you talk to yourself, mistakes will be less devastating and the future will be more bright. You'll be able to do more things. The last thing is that I do think that therapy and medication can have a good role here. That's where we also don't know how long this person is on medication, but just a reminder, a couple things about medication. The first is that antidepressants tend to take about 8 weeks to become effective. So if you started the medication a week ago, it's not going to do anything yet. That's the amount of time that it takes to become effective, 8 weeks. So for 2 months, not going to see a whole lot, potentially. Some people it happens earlier. Some people you'll get benefits within 2 weeks or 1 month, but give it at least 8 weeks. Second thing to consider is that if you are in a depressive episode, if you actually have a clinical diagnosis of major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, or some kind of other mood disorder, that these things are generally speaking temporary. So we know that depressive episodes, generally speaking, last from anywhere from a few weeks to a month to about 1 year. And so as long as you stay on medication, hopefully it'll reduce the frequency and severity of those episodes. Next thing is if your therapist says, here's a medication, go find a job, GG, go, and they're not supporting you in that process, you should probably find a different therapist. And that's where most therapists don't prescribe medication, so I don't know exactly what you mean by therapist. So that's where, like, give yourself a little bit of slack, give yourself time for the medication to work. By the way, all this stuff is in Dr. K's Guide to Depression, where we explain some of these core concepts and how psychotherapy works and how medication works and some of these things like that. So the other thing you should absolutely do is educate yourself. But at the end of the day, if every dimension of your life seems to be falling apart, the most important thing is not to fix this thing over here, this thing over here, this thing over here, and this thing over here. It's actually to fix the common element, which is here. It's to fix the tool with which you play the game of life. And fixing the tool starts with a very, very subtle thing of distributing responsibility. Because chances are, if you're going nowhere in life at the age of 24, you weren't taught how to go somewhere. And this kind of cognitive reframing, and this is also why we started career coaching, by the way, because we realized that there's all kinds of skills. There's a connection between emotions, behavior, self-understanding, and self-judgment, and even like a certain how-to. So if you look at our coaching program is actually designed to address these kinds of issues. So even in career coaching, it's like, how do you put together a resume? How do you talk to your boss? In general coaching, it's going to be like more about, okay, let's understand the thought patterns of your mind. Let's understand how the thought patterns of your mind, where they come from and how they interfere with what you do. Let's also give you a space where if you need to vent off negative emotional energy, you can do it in a healthy manner, in a coaching sort of environment, so that when you go for your job interview, like you're not carrying those negative emotions around. Right? So you could definitely do that in therapy as well, but therapy is going to be more clinically focused. And generally speaking, your therapist will say things like, it's important for you to find a job, whereas most of us are not formally trained in like helping people find jobs. We're formally trained in diagnosis and treatment. Right? So that's why we have a career coaching program, because we hear this kind of crap entirely too much. I went to therapy. They told me to find a job, but they didn't tell me how. So that's where, like, at the end of the day, you've got to challenge your mindset. You have to shape your mindset because that's the instrument that you use for everything. Your mind is going to be the thing that determines your social interactions, whether you apply for a job, whether you get a GED. All of that requires your mind. So the mind is the first thing to fix. Questions? So Pixie Kate is saying so many therapists are not qualified, I swear. I'd like to be a little bit more optimistic than that. I think a lot of therapists are operating in a system that does not allow them to succeed. I think a lot of the way that therapy is delivered is, I think, not the fault of the therapist. We have a medical system that overemphasizes particular problems, which is entirely why coaching has cropped up. Why did this? If therapists were great at this stuff, there would have been no market for this, bluntly. But over time, what's happening is therapy is becoming more protocolized, it's becoming more generic, and it's becoming more medical legal. You have 45-minute appointments. Sorry, I have to see like six people to like make my RVUs and meet my productivity quota. So I don't have an extra half hour for you. I'm sorry that the insurance provider does not pay for a 75-minute appointment. The most they'll pay for is a 50-minute appointment. And that's because there are all these studies that show that 50-minute appointments are effective medical treatments for depression. So that's not additional time I can give you. There's a lot of how therapists also, some of them will assess for suicidality on every visit with every patient. Right? So I'd like to cut my colleagues a little bit more slack and sort of like, I acknowledge that, if they operate a particular way, is it that they're underqualified or undertrained? I don't think so. I think they're squeezed, just like everyone else's. So that fish is asking, how do you deal with your mind constantly putting out negative thoughts about you? I'm 34 and trying to hope, but it's difficult. Yeah, so this is like literally what is in Dr. K's guide to ADHD and doing stuff. No one teaches us how to control the thoughts in our mind. So one thing that we attempt to do is, in a very basic way, explain how to control. It's basically Dr. K's guide to mind control. The big difference is when we use the phrase mind control, everyone is talking about controlling other people's minds. The truth of the matter is that we can control our own mind. You can control, there are influences that determine where your thoughts come from and what thoughts propagate in your head. And all that has to it's heavily rooted in yoga and as well as like studies on ADHD, because we understand, because if you think about ADHD, what is ADHD? It's a disorder of attention. What does a disorder of attention mean? It means that the mind is thinking about particular things that it shouldn't be thinking about. It wanders away from what it should and gets caught up in things that it shouldn't be caught up with. Can you name the book again? It's not a book. It's Dr. K's guide to ADHD and doing stuff. All right, let's move on. Okay. What was second? Second was in the poll. Moments of true potential, right? Let's talk about ADHD. Okay. So someone's asking, how do you identify if someone has depression? That's something that's usually a clinical diagnosis that's performed by a clinician. All right, let's talk about ADHD and potential. So do you have moments of your true potential? I can only explain it as a temporary and extremely inconsistent moment where I'm operating completely normal. I can converse, I have a high confidence, I'm witty, I can think sharply, I'm at complete ease, and everything seems effortless and easy. It might happen one day every few weeks or even longer. It's like the stars have aligned and everything is functioning as it should. I see this state and it's both encouraging and extremely discouraging. It's a tease. It's like dangling a carrot in front of me. This is what you could be like, but unfortunately you'll be dysfunctional again tomorrow. This is what makes the condition so tantalizing, because I know what I'm capable of, but I cannot sustain the state of mind for any amount of time. And it's seemingly so completely random when it occurs. Then I'll be back in my brain fog, stuttering, unable to articulate my thoughts, unable to be present, lost in my head, incapable of making decisions, etc. So, this is the kind of thing where it's really unfortunate. But sometimes we have moments of true potential, right? And it feels like we're trying to bottle lightning. So it's like there's this flash and then suddenly everything works the way that it's supposed to. You're talking to people, the ideas are going, you're productive, you're focused, you're witty, you're having a good time, you're feeling good, right? It's not just about productivity, it's also about mood. The problem is that it's like completely RNG. And we have no idea like what causes this. And this is actually what's so devastating about it, is that we know, I love the way that this person kind of described it. We know it's possible. All we have to do is like figure out how. So this is the kind of thing where we can't even give up on it, right? We can't grieve it because it's not gone. It's not like it's never happening again. It's not like it happened just once. It happens consistently. Randomly, but consistently. Every few weeks, you get one day where everything is amazing. And so then your mind is like, if only I could do this, then my life could be like that. Like, it could be so amazing. And then what happens is it's like possible, but you can't figure it out, right? And so then you get really, really frustrated with yourself because you're like, how do I do this? How do I do this? How do I do this? If only I could do it. Why can't I be like this all the time? These are the kinds of thoughts that your mind has. And then you're stuck because like you have one of two options, right? Either you struggle to try to figure this out, and if you can, imagine what your life would be like, or you accept that this is not something that you can control, and then all of these things that you're capable of, you have to like let go. Sorry, not going to be productive, not going to be confident, not going to be witty, not going to be on point. But you don't want to give that up because it's possible. So it's super challenging. So what's going on here, and what can we do about it? So the first thing that I want to ask y'all is like, what do you think contributes to success? Actually, let me rephrase. What do you think contributes to successful performance? So when people are struggling in life, what are the features that they sort of think about in terms of like whether they're successful or not? Okay, so like I'm seeing a lot of stuff about, diet and karma and focus and all this good stuff. So generally speaking, if we look at how human beings conceptualize success, they think of two things. They think of traits and they think of experience. So we'll hear this a lot in our language, right? So people will say motivation, discipline. A person is motivated. Another person is lazy. One person is disciplined, another person is undisciplined. These are all traits, right? So these are like, even in the 5-factor personality model, we'll have things like conscientiousness. And so what this essentially means is that the future is kind of deterministic. If you were born with the laziness gene, you're screwed. If you're born with the hardworking gene and the motivation gene, you're in good shape. I am confident or I am shy, right? These are traits. So a trait is an inborn like kind of capacity that's like sort of like fixed. The other thing that we assume is experience. So we assume that people who do things more are going to be able to do them more and be able to be more successful. So when I do any kind of performance coaching work, right? So like I'll just use esports as an example, but I do this for physicians as well, attorneys, investment bankers, whatever. So I'll ask people, and we could have this conversation with you too. So when you play a video game, the more you play a video game, do you get better at it? Interesting question. The automatic answer may be yes, obviously, but that may not be entirely true, right? So people are saying not always, because like you can play a game for 1,000 hours, especially like PvP games, and it's not like you're getting better every single minute, right? You can stick around, you can plateau at a particular rank or MMR. So the other thing that's kind of weird is, in theory, every game you play, you have more experience. You learn something from each game you play. If you learn something from each game you play, your chances of winning the next game should increase. And when I talk to like pro esports players, for example, what I'll ask them is like, what determines like whether you're going to win a game or lose a game? And so they'll say things like, oh, it's like my game knowledge, how much I practice and stuff like that. Okay, fine. So like, but then if game knowledge determines whether you win a game or lose a game, what that should mean is that my game knowledge is relatively fixed across 10 games, right? If I'm a pro, my game knowledge is fixed across those 10 games, which means that either my game knowledge is good enough and I should win all those 10 games, or my game knowledge is bad and I should lose all those 10 games. Because game knowledge is relatively static over the course of a 10-game stretch if you're a professional player. You can also think about this in medicine. So if I'm a doctor, like I've been practicing for 20 years, and like over a 10-day stretch, it's not like I forget a bunch of medicine and that's why like patients do poorly, or I remember a bunch of medicine, that's why patients do well. So it ain't experience. So this is where what most people miss is that a lot of your success or a lot of your ability to motivate or have your mind do what you want it to is not based on trait or experience, it's based on state. So states are temporary, right? It's a state of mind, a state of health, a state of illness. So having the flu, having influenza is a state. It's not a trait. There's no influenza gene. This is like a temporary state. And in our society, we have a very, very big bias towards focusing on traits instead of states. So basically, when I work with someone, what we focus on is who is the person who sits down at the computer to play the video game. This is really simple. How do you think a pro gamer's performance is if they haven't slept for 48 hours? It's going to suck, right? Duh. But wait a minute. But like they've played 20,000 hours of the game before. Their game knowledge is still there. That hasn't gone away. It's not like they have dementia. They're not more lazy, less lazy. There's a lot of variability within our state. And if you want to capture these kinds of moments and you have ADHD, the way to capture them is by focusing on state, not trait. Because it's possible. Your brain is capable of it. If your brain wasn't capable of it, you would have never had it happen. So this sort of feels like the stars align. Now, here's the cool thing. If you pay attention, you can figure out what the stars are and even how to arrange them. And this is how you can get consistent performance, is by focusing on state. So what we're going to do is take a look at 7 or 8 factors that people tend to underemphasize when it comes to determining states. Okay? So let's take a look at this. So just a quick recap. State versus trait. So these are things like personality, fixed, deterministic. Why are you successful? I'm motivated. Why are you lazy? Why are you unsuccessful? Because I'm lazy. These kinds of things. Even we can think about motivation as a state as well, but oftentimes when you talk to people, they'll use motivated as a trait. This person is motivated, right? It's like, oh, like this person must be so motivated. Another good one is smart, talented, right? This is like fixed, like smart is fixed. It's not something that changes on an hourly basis. So states are variable, alterable, and sort of like not deterministic, right? So it's sort of like kind of varies. That's the key thing. But they're both very, very involved in terms of determining kind of what you accomplish. So the flow state is a really good example of like states of mind where we have productivity. So examples of state are the flow state. We also have in meditation dhyana, right? We have different states of consciousness. We can also call this in the zone. So we know that these are temporary. The question is, how do we cultivate them? And the answer, there's a lot that we can do. So the first thing that we can do to cultivate a particular state of mind is control our thoughts. So we're going to go into more detail with some of these and less detail with others. So we just talked a little bit about self-talk, but you can actually change your self-talk. And this you can change through emotional processing. So I'll give you guys just a quick example. So let's say I'm not motivated to date, or it's really hard for me to go on a date. And as I talk to someone, so I've talked to patients, for example, I'll be like, yeah, it's really hard for me to go on a date. I'll talk to them why. Okay, what happened? Well, I had this one relationship that lasted 7 years, and then the person kind of abandoned me. And now, like, every time, like, and so I sort of feel, they don't say it this way, but they end up feeling unlovable. They end up fearing that the same thing will happen to them again. And so they don't want to invest any amount of time in dating. They don't want to waste their time because they put 7 years into this relationship and they didn't get it back. And so now they're like scared to date because I don't have another 7 years to waste. And if I don't have 7 years to waste, and that's the predominant thought in my mind, when I go on a date, it's going to what does that create, right? It creates all kinds of pressure on the other person. It's a lack of confidence. You're certainly not going to have fun, right? Because you're like thinking about, I can't afford to waste any time. I can't afford to waste any time. And you're sitting there, you're supposed to be trying to get to know someone, like that's not fun at all. So this can sort of be somewhat of a self-controlling, self-fulfilling prophecy. So you have to learn how to control your thoughts, and a big part of that is going to be emotional processing. Also, lots of detail into how to do that in Dr. K's Guide to Doing Stuff. Second thing that we have to be really careful about is our internal emotional state. Sort of related to number one, but what I mean by this is like processing past emotions. Okay? So this is like past emotions. And what we sort of know, if you look at studies on people who have addictions, what you discover is the part of their brain that is aware of their internal emotional state is not as robust as a healthy person. So what does this mean? If you ask people who relapsed, how did you relapse? Everything was going great, and then I don't know what happened. They'll say things like, I don't know what happened. If you actually tunnel down, what you tend to find is that there's some kind of subsurface powerful emotion that causes them to reach for the numbing agent. They just weren't aware of it. So you have to become aware of your internal emotional state. How are you feeling in the moment? Next thing that we're going to talk a little bit about, this is really interesting, is we don't really think about the foods that we eat as psychoactive. So we know that there are some things I can put into my body like caffeine, let's say alcohol, marijuana, even things like, people will even try stuff like theanine, ashwagandha. There's all kinds of stuff that we can use, kava kava. These are all herbs and stuff that are psychoactive, affect the state of our mind. But we tend to think that these things affect our mind, but we don't think about things like sandwiches or tomatoes or rice or fried chicken as psychoactive substances. But it turns out that they are. Diet in the Treatment of ADHD in Children, a systematic review of the literature. A total of 52 studies were identified, some investigating whether ADHD symptoms can improve by avoiding certain food elements, 20 studies, and whether certain foods may reduce ADHD symptoms. Elimination diets and fish oil supplementation seem to be promising dietary interventions for the reduction of ADHD symptoms in children. Interesting, huh? So let's understand this for a second. What determines your motivation? Like, which organ of the body determines motivation and clarity of mind? Right? Chances are it's our brain. I don't know if you guys know this, but the brain is a physiologic organ that requires like physical substances. So for example, fish oil is high in omega-3, and omega-3 is very, very important for neuronal health. So there's a decent chance that if you have trouble getting into the right state of mind, that your diet could be part of the problem, which we don't tend to think about. And this is why if you look at yogis, so like yogis who want to meditate for 12 hours a day, they're very controlling for their diet. I've been on, I mean, not right now, but in the past, I've been on something called a sattvic diet. And being on a sattvic diet for 90 days is when you truly understand. That's when you begin to understand what meditation truly is. I don't think you can even achieve some of these higher states of consciousness unless you're on a sattvic diet. And that's why all the yogis eat this way. They're not eating that way for their figure, and they're not eating their way out of financial reasons. What they've actually done is looked at all of the subtle effects of food on the mind. And there's like a consciousness diet, which they adopt. Sattvic. Okay? We're not going to go into that right now, but there are all kinds of foods. So this is where, like, if you're struggling in terms of your motivation or these clarity moments, it's important, what did you eat for the 24 to 72 hours before you had that moment? Because chances are there's something in your diet that helped a lot. Next thing that we don't really consider in terms of states is low-grade inflammation. This is somewhat related to diet, but we also know that, for example, like when people have gluten sensitivity, it creates like a low-grade inflammation, and then they have like trouble in their, like, because your brain is like mildly inflamed. So if you think about getting over a cold and how motivated and how energetic you are when you're like a little bit sick. And some of our diet is actually filled with stuff that is kind of pro-inflammatory. And as there's all kinds of things like leaky gut hypothesis, and we sort of know that like low-grade inflammation is going to be bad for cognitive function. Right? I want y'all to think about this. There are studies, and these studies, by the way, I've looked at a lot of them in detail. They're not very robust. So the data behind diet and ADHD is actually not that great, by the way. I mean, there's like indications that it helps, but I just don't think that it's specific enough. But this is the kind of thing where, like, what's the inflammatory state of your body? Are you eating pro-inflammatory foods? Are you getting like, and this is why, like, if we look at scientific studies on health, like, what does it take? You know, fruits and vegetables. And how much of this are you eating? And if you're not eating enough of it, chances are what you're going to do is you're going to get constipated. And as you get constipated, I don't know if y'all know this, but you start to get rotting material stuck in your intestines. And then this stuff causes inflammation. How do you feel after you have a good poop? Right? Kind of weird. We don't really think about it very much. So if you're like wondering how to bottle this lightning of these pro ADHD, like these like high productivity states, it involves touching on all of these things. Next thing that we don't really think about is rest quality. So how are you sleeping? And this is where we don't really think about a couple things. So good example of this. So alcohol and marijuana both reduce your REM sleep. So this is the tricky thing about alcohol and to a lesser extent marijuana. I know the science behind alcohol a little bit better. Alcohol helps people fall asleep, but lowers the quality of their sleep. So if you drink on a regular basis or you smoke on a regular basis, chances are the quality of sleep that you're getting overnight is like not good, or it's worse. So REM sleep generally composes of 18 to 23% of a night's sleep. The other thing about REM sleep is we're not really sure what it does. We don't really know, even despite all of our advances. It appears to be important, but we're not quite sure how or why. And we know that alcohol reduces your REM sleep. So you may still sleep for 8 or 9 hours if you get drunk and you pass out. It's very easy to fall asleep, but then the quality of your sleep sucks. So whatever your brain is trying to accomplish during sleep, where it goes through these different stages and REM sleep and stuff like that, you're sabotaging it by using these kinds of things. So if your rest quality is not good, your ability to cultivate that magical state of productivity is going to be hampered. Last thing that we're going to talk about is environment. So this too, we've got a lot, we're going to cover it now, but there's a lot more detail about how to structure your environment in our upcoming guide on Dr. K's Guide to ADHD and Doing Stuff. But let's go through a couple of basics, okay? So if y'all want like worksheets and like implementation plans and stuff like that, that's all in the guide, but we're going to cover the basics right here and now. So the first thing to understand is that there are things called permissive influences. So what's an example of a permissive influence? A permissive influence is something that allows something else to happen. So for example, in the female menstrual cycle, we have estrogen and progesterone. So when my body secretes estrogen, or when my ovaries secrete estrogen, it creates progesterone receptors. So estrogen goes in and creates a progesterone receptor like this. And now when I have progesterone, which is a little cube, it has something to go and activate. Oh, you guys can't see this. Okay? So this is where like progesterone doesn't work without estrogen. And so this is where even if you look at things like birth control for women, it involves messing with the balance of these hormones so that you essentially don't allow for a progestational, i.e. pro-pregnancy state. So what does this have to do with like cultivating these moments in ADHD? What are the permissive influences for those moments? When you hang out with a particular group of friends, do they make you more interested in working or less interested in working? And this is where there's permissive influences for procrastination as well. There are permissive influences for bad states of mind. Sometimes y'all may have had a on-again, off-again relationship with someone who's toxic that you just can't get away from. When they enter your life, boy, is it a blast, but boy, does everything else in your life start to go to hell. So you can have people who are permissive influences for things like procrastination and toxicity. And you can have permissive influences for things like focus, ambition, and positivity. So do you go to professional networking events? Do you go to startup meets? I remember back when I was in Boston, there was this cool thing called Venture Cafe, which was just an event, a networking event every week where there's like someone who comes and talks about startups. And you just go and you learn what people are doing in the Cambridge area, which is like near where MIT is and stuff like that. Harvard and MIT are there. So like you just go and like every week you like, if you just go and you just talk to people and you just like, it gets you thinking, gets the juices flowing. Right? So for those of you that noticed our Touch a Grass initiative, so we've like got that going on, this is a great way to get out of your house. Because if you're stuck within these four walls, what kinds of thoughts do these four walls encourage? When you're in these four walls, what do you feel like doing? What do you end up doing? What do you end up thinking about? So if you want to capture these motivational moments of brilliance, what you've got to do is recognize, first of all, that it's not about traits. It's not about discipline. It's not about intelligence. It's not about talent. It's about states. It's recognizing that this brain, in order to create a certain state of focus, mental focus is born of the mind, and the mind is seated within the brain. And we know this because if you eat particular foods or ingest particular substances like alcohol, it alters the function of your mind. What organ system is alcohol acting on? It's focusing on the brain. So as we alter the physicality of our brain, we will create particular mental states. So this is where a lot of that state work is done through things like diet, Sleep, exercise, vitamin D, all that kind of stuff. And there's more to it than that. There's cultivating the right kinds of thoughts. You can certainly meditate. There's also cultivating the right kind of environment. So if you're trying to capture those moments, it's not so much that you should not look at what to do. What you should do is like look at that moment and try to look at the days before, the weeks before. What was your emotional state? Were you stressed out about something? Were you feeling really good about stuff? Like what happened? What led up to that? What was going on within your body, within your gut, within your brain, and within your mind that fostered and allowed this fertile soil for this state of consciousness to arise? And as you get into that, then you will be able to actually cultivate these states consistently. This is the wild thing. You can absolutely do this. And for those of you that are saying, oh, I just need to like sleep well and eat healthy, right? That sounds hard. So why is it hard to do? It's because I don't think for many people, it clicks what the cost of sleeping poorly, using drugs, and eating unhealthily is. They don't realize that the cost is losing out on these moments of brilliance. What you're costing yourself is going into Super Saiyan mode. Right? We just don't appreciate the cost because it never clicks with us that these two things are related. And as we start to work on these influences, you will find that this effort over time, it takes time. You're going to plant a seed, you're going to plant another seed. It'll turn into a shrub, and then eventually it'll have flowers, and then eventually it'll bear fruit. And once you sort of figure out what your internal formula is in terms of like productivity and focus, like it'll transform your life. Questions? This is a good question. What if sleep deprivation makes you disinhibited enough to reach that state? Isn't it a slippery slope? Great question. Someone else was asking, sometimes I perform better when I'm fatigued. So there's one really important exception to being well rested. So when you're fatigued, your mind is a little bit exhausted and your thoughts move slower. When your thoughts move slower, if what is destroying your focus is a hyperactive mind, then you will be more focused. So if there's a good level of focus, this focus can be destroyed either by having a hyperactive mind or a hypoactive mind. So for example, if I feel overwhelmed and I can't focus because I have 1,000 different things going on, and my mind is all over the place, that's a hyperactive mind. So focus can be shattered by a hyperactive mind. And sometimes fatigue can be an antidote to that, right? Because then like your mind is like operating at 80%. And so 80% of all of your stress actually puts you in a good space. Because you're normally like, your mind is operating at like 120%. So you need some kind of fatigue to kind of calm you down and chill you out. This is also why some people will reach for substances to calm themselves down, to treat their anxiety, right? I use marijuana for my anxiety, for example, because it slows their mind down. So the goal is slowing your mind down. Now you can do that through a substance. You can do it through a medication sometimes. You can do it through fatigue. Or you can do it through healthier methods than all of those, which is like training your mind to slow down, processing thoughts, learning how to compartmentalize thoughts, learning how to set things down in your mind. There are all kinds of different things you can do. You can also train your thoughts through your breathing. So the speed of your thoughts correlates with the speed of your exhalation specifically. So this is why, for example, when people are hyperventilating in a panic attack, we'll ask you to breathe in a paper bag. Why do we ask you to breathe in a paper bag? We don't really do that as much anymore. But that's because like as you breathe in a paper bag, the CO2 level within the bag starts to sort of increase. So you have to take slower, deeper breaths. So what happens is we have this thing called physiologic dead space. So I don't know if this sort of makes sense, but even when I fully exhale, my lungs are not completely empty, right? It's not like completely empty. There's air stuck in there that keeps my lungs open. Then what happens is the air down here, let's say, like if I have air down here in my lungs, like along the bottom, all the oxygen has been removed from that air. Then when I exhale, this air goes out and ends up in my throat. Because even at the end of my exhalation, there's actually air in my throat. And then when I breathe in again, this air is the first air that goes down into my lungs. So we have this thing called physiologic dead space, which is space where there's air that has no oxygen. So if I'm taking shallow breaths, the dead air is moving here, 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 and I only get fresh air in this part. Whereas if I take a deep breath, the dead air goes down here, the air without oxygen goes down here, and then I get all this with fresh air, if that sort of makes sense. So we want to encourage hypoventilation to calm down anxiety. It's physiologic. Yogis figured this out as well. It's part of the reason that a lot of these breathing practices involve slowing the breath and thus controlling the mind. So the key thing here is that your mind can be controlled. You can foster a particular state of mind that's incredibly productive. You just have to know how to do it. And this is the cool thing, is that all of these decisions don't require like willpower, right? It's not forcing yourself into the state of mind. It's actually decisions that you make the day before, and the day before, and the day before. It's going to bed a little bit earlier, waking up a little bit later, potentially. It's about processing your emotions a little bit better. It's about having, let's say, an apple before you have your pepperoni pizza, as opposed to just having pepperoni pizza. All of these things will matter, right? So giving up pepperoni pizza is like hard from a willpower standpoint. But if you're starving, like kind of nudging yourself towards eating an apple before you dive into the pizza is way easier. Pizza's right there. I'm going to take 2 slices instead of 3. I'm just going to have an apple first. As you start to cultivate these sorts of changes, your mind will improve. And when your mind improves, you'll find yourself in these states more often. So someone's asking, does this mean I should go for a crazy run in the morning to control ADHD a bit? That's where I would say you should try it and see what happens. Right? You should try it. So that's where like you're going to figure out. This is where the right answer is not something that I'm going to tell you, because I don't know what your body is precisely. I don't know what your brain is precisely. I don't know what your mind is precisely. These are the major factors that people tend to miss. Thank you very much for the donations, by the way. Okay, so I see other questions. What if your mind is hypoactive? So that's where, so our mind becomes sort of hypoactive, especially through technology use. It becomes kind of dulled, right? Where then what happens is we need the technology to like artificially ramp it up. So an engaging TikTok or an adrenaline-inducing video game takes a baseline hypoactive mind and amplifies it to a normal level, which is why it's so damn addictive. And then once we stop playing the game, we go back to the hypoactive mind, right? And we don't like being in that state. So we need the adrenaline to like build up. And the other problem is that as we get more and more adrenaline through the game, we actually down-regulate some of our receptors in our brain. Not really adrenaline receptors. This is sort of a extrapolation here. And then what happens is we sort of become dependent on it, almost like caffeine. So if your mind is hypoactive, that's where we look at some of these permissive influences. Like, what are you eating? Who are you spending time with? Who are the people that stimulate your thoughts in the right direction? Thank you for the donation, Nicholas. So GDOM2000 is saying, I can confirm that exercise and diet helped with my ADHD. The worse I eat, the worse my symptoms tend to get. Right? And then if you go into Ayurveda, so we don't really have great scientific evidence for this, but if you go into Ayurveda, they even say there are particular foods that fruits and vegetables are not all the same, that particular fruits and particular vegetables will be good at cultivating particular mental states. Now, we have some evidence of this sort of, right? So Ayurveda goes as far as saying particular foods are good for particular mental states, but they start by saying that presumes that all of the foods are unique. And generally speaking, in Western medicine for a long time, we've said 5 servings of fruits or vegetables doesn't really matter what you eat. Whereas now we know that there are some things like cruciferous vegetables that have particular effects on your cytochrome P450 enzymes. We know that grapefruit can do that as well and will actually cause particular alterations. So we now are starting to see that there's a lot more specificity to fruit and vegetable than we originally realized. Even if you look at some of these things like the FODMAP diets, these are good examples of like how particular foods, not all fruits and vegetables are made the same. And there's an intersectional component between foods that we eat as well as someone's individual digestion. These are concepts that Ayurveda has been hypothesizing or proposing for thousands of years. Okay, so Fractal Loop has a great question. I've heard probiotics have positive effects on mental health due to gut health. What do you think? So, very good question. We go into a lot of detail in this in Dr. K's guide, so y'all can watch it. There's a lot more detail, but we'll answer it here. So, gut bacteria has definitely a strong impact on your mental health. So we know this because we know this from a lot of different ways. So we know that gut bacteria can sometimes cause inflammation or be healthy and have less inflammation. So inflammation in the gut leads to inflammation in the brain. Inflammation in the brain tends to negatively impact things like mood. This we know. Second thing that we know, certain kinds of gut bacteria are more symbiotic than others. So some gut bacteria will make neurotransmitter precursors. So they'll produce tryptophan. So here's the relationship you have with your gut bacteria. You give it food, it breaks down the food, keeps some for itself, and gives you what's left over. And your brain takes tryptophan, which is made by some gut bacteria, and turns it into serotonin, which, by the way, is what we supplement when people are depressed or have anxiety disorders. Okay? So we know that gut creates neurotransmitter precursors. Next thing that we know, so those are like basic science kind of things. The question, though, is that do those actually lead to clinical benefits? Sure, it causes inflammation. We can measure that. Sure, they create neurotransmitters, but does it actually make a difference clinically? And the answer is yes. We've done studies on stool transplants, which is exactly what it sounds like. They will take stool from one person or rat and implant it into another person or rat, and they will see improvement in conditions like major depressive disorder. So it appears, and stool, by the way, is 50% bacteria. Okay? So we've tested it. Seems to work. Take the poop from a depressed rat, take the poop from a healthy rat, stick it into a depressed rat, and the depressed rat gets better. We also know that there are particular strains of bacteria that are more common in people who have bad anxiety. There are 2 strains of bacteria that are tightly associated with bad anxiety, and there are 2 strains of bacteria that appear to be anti-anxiety. Or if you look, what we mean by that is if you look at people who have low anxiety scores and you check their gut, there are 2 bacteria that they have that people who have high anxiety don't have. In fact, people who have high anxiety have these 2 different kinds of bacteria. So there seems to be a lot of connections between gut bacteria and mental health. The question, though, was probiotics and mental health. Now, this is where the marketing gets tricky. So if you take a probiotic, how long are you supposed to take it? People usually say take it every day. Why do you have to take probiotics every day? They have CFUs, colony-forming units. They're living bacteria. Why do you have to take probiotics all day long? That's because probiotics may not affect it. And the reason is because which bacteria grow in your gut? The ones that you feed. So this is where, the health industry would love to say, hey, look at all this research on mental health and gut bacteria. Take this pill every day. By the way, you need to take it every day in order to get this beneficial bacteria. But what determines your gut bacteria is not whether you take a probiotic every day. It's what you feed your bacteria. So if I eat a lot of processed foods with simple sugars, there are going to be some bacteria in my gut that digest those preferentially, right? So I'm going to be feeding the bacteria that like processed foods and simple sugars. Whereas if I eat like oatmeal and broccoli all the time, I'm going to be feeding the bacteria that break down complex fibers and like cellulose and some of these other things that we can't digest. So the key thing about maintaining proper gut bacteria is not taking probiotics every day. It's eating the right foods. So if I take probiotics and then I can add 50,000 units of whatever kind of bacteria you want in a probiotic pill. But 50,000 units is nothing. We have 10 times as many bacterial cells in our body as we have human cells. For every one cell inside this that is human, there are 10 cells that are bacterial. So 50,000, 100,000, 300,000 CFUs of like probiotics is like nothing compared to what you've got in there. So this is where what I tend to find is that you can take probiotics, but you've got to eat the right foods too. And what we love to do in current developed society, we love to take pills that absolve us of behaviors. I don't want to eat broccoli. Just give me the freaking probiotic pill. And there is a whole supplement industry that loves that. So what is the role of probiotics on mental health? Short answer is we don't know. Right? At least I haven't seen overwhelming or convincing evidence that probiotics consistently help. There's some evidence that they help because you do need to populate with the right bacteria. The key thing that people miss is that once you populate with the right bacteria, you need to support those bacteria with the right foods. And as you support those bacteria with the right foods, then you'll start to see positive effects, which is exactly how we get to this paper. Right? So if we go back to this one, elimination diets and fish oil supplementation seem to improve symptoms of ADHD. So why is the elimination diet important? Probably from the inflammatory standpoint. Okay. So people are asking what foods promote tryptophan and serotonergic precursors. So this is where our science falls short. So it's my belief that the Ayurvedic diet, the mechanism of action of Ayurvedic diets is through gut bacteria. That's my belief. We actually don't have a whole lot of strong science to support that. And our Western conception of diet is still, I think, like very primitive. So we still think predominantly in macronutrients. We need 50 grams of protein. But is 1 gram of protein the same as another gram of protein? If I get a gram of protein from a lentil, is that the same as a chicken breast? If the chicken breast is organic and free range, does that matter? So we tend to think about macronutrients. We tend to split things up and we're like grams of fiber is what's important, which is true. But we don't really have good evidence on this. This is something that I will say is that when I work with patients, right? So I don't have data to support this, but anecdotally, patients who adopt better diets can come off of medication easier. I've seen that very consistently in my practice. Now, what's going on there? Is it the gut bacteria? Who knows? Is it just eating healthy? Who knows? It could be correlational as well, that people who are healthier can eat healthier, right? Because it's like harder to make yourself salad than it is to like microwave something from the freezer. So maybe there could be a correlational thing where it's not really causation, it could be correlation. Yeah, so I think we've published some of this stuff. So I definitely know there's guide supplements, dietary supplements with Dr. K's guide. I imagine that some of those are floating around on the internet. But, and a lot of different people will talk about Ayurvedic diet. Okay, we've got time for maybe one more. All righty. Actually, I gotta use the bathroom real quick. Do y'all want me to switch to the starting soon screen, or should I leave? Y'all want to do chair stream? Okay, chair stream. Okay, chair stream it is. Chair stream is finished. All right. I did a number 1 chat, not a number 2. You guys think I wash my hands? Joke's on you. That's urine. By the way, weirdest. So I spent a long time trying to figure out what works in terms of like helping people. Right? So like I became like a crystal healer and stuff like that. Weirdest thing. I gotta say, the weirdest kind of person that I studied with was an auto urine therapist. So in the Ayurvedic tradition, there are also lots of treatments that either we have no idea if they work or not, or are actually harmful. So one example of this is Rasa Shastra, which is the usage of certain heavy metals in Ayurvedic medicines, which can be toxic if you're not careful. And another sort of subset is something called auto urine therapy, which is drinking your own urine, which I don't think there's really any evidence for. So certainly don't do that. And also you got to be a little bit careful. And this is the biggest problem with all the Eastern medical traditions, is they're in a fight against allopathic medicine or like scientific medicine. And so what they don't want to do is like admit that some of their things don't work. So the whole Ayurvedic tradition, I don't think works. Right? There's like definitely a lot of good stuff in there, but there's also like a lot of stuff that we have really no idea about. Yeah, we'll see. All right. Let's do one more. Let's help this person if we can, because that's what we're here for, right, chat? Okay. My boyfriend's lost hope in life is either gaming or sleeping and refuses to get therapy. He isn't the man that I met, and I'm at a loss. I met my boyfriend a little over a year ago. We instantly clicked. This is a long-distance relationship. We met over mutual friends and would spend hours together, watching movies and TV shows, playing cooperative and competitive games, doing silly personality tests, essentially sharing our worlds with each other. I loved getting to discover what he loved, and and believe he felt the same about me. He was in university studying to be a software engineer. He was really passionate about this career. We'd spend a lot of calls sitting together as he wrapped up assignments, and then moved on to spending hours upon hours talking and laughing together. A couple months into the relationship, his depression came back. It affected the end of his semester. I spent a lot of time with him, offering support as best as I could. I obviously was not trying to fix him or whatever, but just to be there and adapt our little routine and time together to accommodate his lower energy and preference for familiar and comfortable things. We got to meet in September, but when I got back home, everything got worse. A couple episodes were taken out on me in outbursts of anger and criticism, but I understand that this isn't him, it's the depression affecting him. Because of the variant and travel disruptions, we were not able to see each other during his winter break. This caused an episode where he threatened to take his own life, calling me a coward for being too afraid to travel with all the uncertainty swirling around. Our first flight got canceled, and it seemed like everything was getting worse and worse, and I wanted to be safe. In retrospect, we would have been fine, and I regret the decision I made. We talked it over. It was forgiven. His mental health tanked and got even worse. He'd take my need for reassurance out on me, feeling like it was undermining the understanding we had in our relationship. It's a little hard to not need reassurance every so often when the person you're with is quite cold and jaded. He dropped out of university in February. He'd sit around playing games all day. We tried making plans for me to come over for his birthday, but getting 3 weeks off in the middle of midterms in a place staffed by college students is rather difficult. Things got postponed to April. Then I caught COVID. Man, can't catch a break. My workplace counted these as days off anyway, so as you can imagine, getting those 3 weeks off has been incredibly difficult and mentally taxing. He's taken it out on me every time. Gets upset, yells, shuts down emotionally. I understand that it feels frustrating and that I'm not doing enough, but it's also affecting me. He doesn't have a passport. We'd been talking about him getting it since November, but he hasn't done it. Lack of motivation and debt. He quit his job as well. 3 weeks ago, we had a big fight regarding his overall mental state affecting me. I workshopped and wrote a large Google Doc laying out the situation, since normal discussions have always turned into big blowout fights and me seeming unreasonable, so I thought a concise text would work. I thought it did. I asked him if he could try therapy again. He's been so adamantly against it, but I just want him to give it one last shot. Maybe it's silly of me, but he agreed. He was soft and sweet and something I hadn't seen in him in months. I decided to put my faith in him again. Fast forward to the other night where I have to beg him to get on a call with me to have some one-on-one time. We hadn't had that in days when he'd promised we'd work on that, since it was so important before. When I expressed that, hey, I'd like to be able to watch things or play games together like we used to, like you told me we could do again, he got upset. In the escalating discussion, I asked if therapy was getting anywhere, even just a first step. He told me he didn't have the motivation anymore, that he didn't want to, and he only agreed because he felt like I was holding him hostage. Like I'd leave him if he didn't, I assume. I understood then and there that maybe everything we spoke about, he only told me what I wanted to hear, so I wouldn't leave him. The thought destroys me. The conversation ended with him telling me it is just very crushing and belittling, that it really feels like you don't love me as is. How can I make him understand that I don't love him any less, but that it's incredibly difficult to be there, to always keep trying, but be met with a jaded and emotionless person? I want him to get better. I miss how things used to be so much. And I still get glimpses of that every now and then and I really, really love him, but also it's damaging me. It's been a week. He's gotten bad news related to a possible career path and has been gaming nonstop. He's either been very sweet to me or very upset because of his games. I haven't brought up therapy since. I'm at a loss. TLDR, my boyfriend's depression has turned him into another person, and if he feels it's inconsiderate to not love him at his worst, when it's destroyed me to watch him fall back down to rock bottom. I'm at a loss as to what to do. I don't want to leave him, but also it's been shown to me he'll say whatever just to make me stay, not because he actually wants to change. So, this is super challenging. Supporting a partner who is depressed and spends all their time playing video games and refuses to go to therapy can be absolutely devastating. Because you're kind of stuck between this like rock and a hard place, right? So on the one hand, you're their partner. So as their partner, it's your job to support them, be there for them, encourage them. Also, you try to be understanding, right? So like I understand that my partner struggles with depression. So it's hard. They don't feel motivated. They have low energy. Like they lash out at me sometimes, but it's not them, it's the depression. So you make allowances for the depression because that's what you have to do. That's what a supportive partner does. But then like it gets tricky, right? Because then they start saying things like, but like this is a situation that is tricky because it's unclear whether the support will actually fix stuff. So if your partner has depression, there's some things that they need to be doing. right? Like they need to go see a therapist. They need to like figure out what's going on with school or like take time off or like whatever. They need to probably spend less time playing video games because that's not helping. The other really tricky thing here is, but if you try to push them to do that, it's like, how do you decide, okay, like if they're depressed and they don't believe that therapy works, but they need to get therapy, like how much do you push them as a partner? If you push them a lot, does that just like kind of backfire in your face? And is that like, does that make sense? It's like, where is the being an emotionally supportive and understanding partner end? And like pushing them to take accountability and responsibility, like where is that fine line? Because if you push it too hard, then what your partner says is like, you don't accept me as I am. You don't love me unconditionally. And that's a blow. And it's like, okay, so I guess if I want to love you unconditionally, that means that I have to just let you ride this out. And like, I can't criticize you. I just have to I can't even have demands for my own emotional needs. Right? Because like I'm in this relationship too, and this is hard for me too, and I want to spend time with you. I love you. But you can't tell them that, because if you tell them that, then they feel guiltier. It causes them to spiral more into the depression. And whenever you push them, like if you really do push them, they'll tell you whatever you want to hear because they're afraid of you leaving. They're afraid of you leaving, but they're not going to actually do anything to make it worth your while to stay. Y'all get that? So it's tough. And then if you break up with them, then you're the asshole who like abandoned their partner when they were depressed, when everything in this person's life is falling apart, when all they needed was your love and your support and your help. You can't abandon them when they've dropped out of college, gotten fired from their job, or playing video games, already had a suicidal attempt. You're the one thing they've got left. And the one source of emotional support, and they're sucking you dry. So what do you do in this situation? Because if you're paying attention, I don't know if y'all have been looking at chat. You could look at the comments, I'm sure, on YouTube video if this gets uploaded. But everyone's like, dump him, leave him, dump him, leave him. Man, this guy like doesn't deserve you. The internet loves to tell us to dump people, abandon people. They're not the ones who have to like sever the connection. They're not the ones who really, really love the person. So they can say, leave him, easy. You deserve better. You deserve better. Man, like stop dating this man-child. Oh my God. Dump him. Move on, man. Right? So there's literally someone who said, dump him, who cares, lol. Obviously this person cares. They're in love. Right? Like they're in love. Y'all know, like, if you're thinking, oh my God, this person should just dump him. If you've been in love, you understand, like, how hard it is to do things. The other thing is, like, you want to be, it's not just you being in love. You want to be a good human being. Do good human beings abandon people when they're sick? No. We don't do that. We help people who are sick. The problem is that, like, helping, like, I don't know how to help. Because I'm being emotionally supportive and things are getting worse. So this is a really challenging situation to be in. And the most dangerous thing about this is if you're in this situation, you're probably terrified because at the end of the day, making this relationship work requires two people. You cannot fix this all on your own. And you're trying to figure out, okay, what's the right thing for me to do? But it's got to involve them at some point. So how do you tackle this situation? The first is, it's hard. Let's acknowledge that, right? It's hard on you. It's hard on them. It's hard on everyone. That's what illness does. It's not like everything balances out in the end. That's not how it is. When if two people are married and one of them gets cancer, there's no, that just sucks for everyone. It doesn't really matter who it sucks more for. It sucks for everyone involved. It just negatively impacts the relationship. Just makes everything harder. So it's okay for it to be hard. At the same time, there are a couple things you've got to understand and a couple things that really need to be done. The first thing to understand is that you cannot save this relationship on your own. Your partner needs to put in time and effort. Now, this is where you're kind of stuck there, because if you tell them that you need to put in time and effort, they feel bad about themselves. Maybe they get suicidal. Maybe they start saying things that make you feel guilty, like you don't love me as I am. right? So they like respond in unhealthy ways. And if you tell them, hey, like I need more from this relationship, that makes things worse for them. So you kind of feel like you're stuck. You can't tell them what your needs are, but you've got to, and we'll share with you how. So the first thing that we're going to so now that we've acknowledged that, next thing that we need to talk about is the relationship of gaming and depression. So we don't know if this person has a clinical depression or not, whatever, they need to get evaluated for that. But in the treatment, in psychiatric treatment of addictions, there's a very important principle called dual diagnosis treatment. So this is the kind of thing where the classic example is alcohol. When you have someone who has major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder and they have an alcohol problem, you can't just fix one. Both of them need to be tackled at the same time. Because here's what happens. If I feel depressed and alcohol is my coping mechanism, I use the alcohol to numb my feelings of depression. As I start to drink more, it interferes with my sleep, reduces REM sleep. As I start to sleep worse, my brain's ability to heal itself and come out of the depression gets negatively impacted. In addition, alcohol is literally a CNS, central nervous system, depressant. So alcohol makes our mood worse, in addition to doing things like messing with our dietary intake and all that kind of stuff. So then we can't, like, we're not eating the right kind of food. Maybe we have a little bit of inflammation of the pancreas from alcohol and all this kind of stuff happens, and then our depression gets worse. If you start drinking a lot, there's also something called a substance-induced mood disorder. So that's where a lot of alcohol can actually trigger a depressive episode. So if I'm depressed and I don't focus on the sobriety, I'm going to use the alcohol to numb the depression, and it'll actually make the depression worse. The flip side is also true. If I know I'm an alcoholic, but I have an undiagnosed major depressive disorder, I can control the drinking until the depression comes. And like, I can manage the drinking if I'm in a stable mindset, but if the depression is untreated, then I'm going to relapse on alcohol. Right? I'm sober, I'm working so hard. I start to have suicidal thoughts. I start to have negative thoughts. I start to beat myself up, and like the depression takes over and causes me to relapse. Because in order to keep the alcohol under control, in order to stay sober, I need to have a healthy and strong mind. So what have we learned in psychiatry? You've got to target both at the same time. You can't fix half the problem because they feed on each other. And this is what I personally have seen with video games as well. So I start to feel depressed, don't have any energy, don't feel like doing anything. So like, what's the one thing that's very easy for me to do, gives me some kind of stimulation and a hit of dopamine, is play video games. As I play video games for hours and hours and hours a day, what does it do? It ruins my mood. Helps me get through the hour, but ruins the day. That's the problem with video games. So your boyfriend plays video games to get through the hour, get through the next hour, get through the next hour, ruins his day, ruins your day, and snaps at you because he's angry. And then you're stuck once again, because how much of him snapping at me is him being inconsiderate? How much of it is his depression, and how much of it is in the video games? The basic problem of dating someone who's depressed is, how much can I blame them for what's going on? How much responsibility am I allowed if I love someone who's depressed? How much accountability do I put on their shoulders? And that's the real bind. Because in our attempt to be supportive and be loving, we actually excuse all of their behavior. And the moment we excuse all of their behavior, the relationship really starts becoming doomed. Because you can't fix everything. Even if they're depressed, that doesn't mean that they're incapable of stuff. So what's the right balance? So this is where what I would say is there are 2 or 3 very concrete things that you can do in order to like try to make this relationship work. The first thing that you've got to do is manage your own emotions. That doesn't mean you have to manage them yourself, but you have to recognize that this relationship is having a toll and cost on you. Those negative emotions are going to be having all kinds of unhelpful effects on your mindset, your cognitive biases, things like that. Like, so I think the reason that everyone's saying leave him is because people who are in this situation are misattributing something. So I think that he's responsible for more here than like you're holding him accountable for. Right? So like, that's what I believe, but we'll sort of get to how to have that conversation. But the first thing is that you've got to kind of take care of yourself. And if your partner isn't in a space to help you emotionally process, I don't know how else you do it, but lean on friends, lean on family, lean on other online connections, work with a therapist yourself, work with a coach, as long as there's not something clinical going on, right? And a coach can definitely help you with this next part as well. So you have to try to manage your own emotions and like take like self-care, like meditate, whatever, go for a run, whatever you need to do. Start playing games with other people, whatever. Then what happens is you need to have a conversation with him. And this is a conversation where it's going to be painful, but it needs to be kind of like calm and like you need to kind of be patient. And this is why it's important for you to be emotionally in a good space so that you can say things in a way that are compassionate, but still accountable. And this is what I have helped patients do. And this is also, to a certain degree, what we try to have coaches help people do. So coaches can help y'all practice communication and learn communication. Clarify your own thoughts and feelings so that you can communicate effectively. So I think you have to have like a conversation with your boyfriend about like what's happening in this relationship. So what you want to do is, I'm going to give you some sample dialogue, right? So you want to start by asking like, how are you feeling nowadays? Like, can you tell me a little bit about what's hard in your life and like, what are you afraid of? So just ask open-ended questions that are non-accusatory. So try to understand where their mindset is. Don't offer any of your own opinions is the first step. Just try to get a sense of where they are. Then what you want to do, so you've got to be careful because as you ask questions that get to the root of the problem, they're going to hurt. It's going to be like a sore point where like your boyfriend is not going to want to talk about it. Because the more that you ask him a question that he doesn't have a good answer to, it brings the shame to the surface. That's the shame that they try to drown out with the video games. But if it's left under the surface and festers, like it's not going to go away. So this is where I'd start by asking like, a couple of questions about, so actually before you can ask them, what can I do to support you? Like what do I do that's helpful for you? Okay, so like, here's how you feel. Okay, I understand. Like, this is hard for you. Your energy level sucks. This is bad. This is bad. Okay, what can I do to help you? And then comes the next question is like, what can you do to help you? This is what I'm going to do to support your health. What are you going to do to support your health? And this is where like, it gets tricky. This is where there are also other conversations about like, where do you see this going? Like, help me understand what to expect from this relationship. And this is where, like if he's like afraid that you're going to leave him and you can say like, yeah, I mean, honestly, like I'm trying to figure out how to stay in this relationship. But I need to know what to expect. And I can understand if you don't know what to expect, do you have any idea like what's going to happen going forward? Like what does this mean? Does this mean that we're going to stay together for 40 years and this is what our relationship is going to be like? Or is this going to get better at some point? What can we do to help it get better? What can I do to help it get better? Or what can you do to help it get better? And this is where he's going to say, okay, I'll go see a therapist. You don't want to take that bait. So you'll notice this if you really pay attention to people who are frustrated. They'll say whatever they can to stop the conversation. Painful conversation. Stop it. Make it stop. I'll say whatever I need to. Just make it stop. Stop asking me about my future. Stop asking me about what do I need to do. I'll just give you whatever. I'll tell you whatever you want to hear. And as soon as that happens, you got to take a step back a little bit. Because this is where if you're emotional, that's exactly what you want to hear. Oh, thank God. Oh, and you're going to just take that bait and you're going to gobble it up. Conversation is over. Let's go play. And then he's going to be nice. Let's go play video games. Let's do all that stuff. Just like, don't have a conversation. No. I'm doing so much better. Let's go have fun. We haven't had fun in such a long time. By the way, I love you so much. Let's go play a game. This is going to be awesome. Let's go stop some noobs. That's where you're like, hold on a second. I'm glad that you said that you want to go to therapy. can you help me understand a little bit about how that decision is coming about? And that's where you want to do something a little bit weird, which is like, don't jump into that plan. Say like, okay, like what do you think that'll be sufficient? And then they may say something like frustrated, like, what do you want me to say? And that's the problem, is because they think that this conversation is about them saying the right thing to make you happy. That's not what this conversation is about. It's not about appeasement. It's about actually fixing the fucking relationship. What are we going to do about this? And at some point, you need to share with your partner, there's so much that you can do, and you need their help. Yeah, F-bomb, right? I don't drop many of those nowadays. Felt like a right time, though. You need their help, too. There's some things that, like, you can't save this relationship on your own. And when you say things like that, it's going to be devastating to them. And that's the kind of thing where it's like, you know, like, how much do you manage that? Like, I'm not sure. Like, how do you manage that? You've got to sort of go slow. So hopefully you have 2 or 3 conversations. And then the last thing to really consider is that at some point, y'all need to have a conversation about love and accountability. Does loving you unconditionally mean no responsibility or accountability? When I ask you to do something, does that mean that I don't accept you as who you are? What does that mean to you? What is the relationship between love and responsibility? If you are in a situation where someone is guilt tripping you by saying you won't accept me as I am, the conversation you need to have with that person is, what is the relationship between loving and responsibility? What is the relationship between accountability and love? And you should genuinely ask that question. Don't go into that with the sort of idea of like, it's like a debate where you're like, yeah, like, I love you, but you've still got to be accountable. Like, you've genuinely got to, the two of y'all have to come to an understanding about what the relationship between these two things are. Is it possible for me to love you and not want to be in this relationship? Is it possible for you to love me and not want to be in this relationship? Does love excuse certain behavior? Like if he snaps at you because he's playing video games and depressed, is that okay because he loves you? Is that okay because you love him? And so this is where if he feels unloved, that's where you can say, no, I love you. It's just I think that there's a difference between love and accountability. It's because I love you that I'm having this conversation. It's because I love you that I'm trying to save this relationship. It's because I love you that I'm telling you I don't know if I can fix this on my own. I'm doing everything that I know how to do, and you seem to be moving in the wrong direction, or we seem to be moving in the wrong direction. And if there's something more I can do, please let me know. But I need your help saving this relationship. And that's going to make him feel super guilty. And you can say, I can understand if that makes you feel guilty. I'm not trying to make you feel worse. It's like literally like I'm asking for your help. And that's the kind of thing where he's like, okay, fine, I'll go see a therapist. And it's like, okay, like what do you think that's going to do? Right? So like that's all, like y'all need to have conversations about this kind of stuff. Like be clear. The problem is people don't teach us how to talk like this, especially when it comes to people who struggle with depression. And so there's like, it's hard, but there's a way to be compassionate and loving and also say to your partner, just because like love and compassion is not going to fix this problem. It's going to take more than love and compassion. If love could cure depression, like the world would be a completely different place. The truth of the matter is that depression happens in here, and someone else's love may be a huge part of the formula, but it's not the whole formula. So what is he going to do? What is he capable of doing? For what amount of time is he going to be incapable? Right? These are all questions that you can ask. And then at the end of the day, like what he may even try to do is just to walk y'all through a couple of things, techniques that he used. He may preemptively break up with you. So he may say things like, okay, fine, like I can't do it, because he may feel like he's not able to do it. Right? And he's like, okay, fine, if you want to dump me, like I'll do us the favor, like whatever. If you don't love me, and they'll like frame it in a weird like gaslighting sort of way. If you don't love me enough to make this relationship work, I'm just gonna break up with you. And then that's when like your response to him has to be like very stable and has to be, are you getting the sense that I'm trying to break up with you? Like, where do you get that? Because the reason I'm having this conversation is to try to save the relationship. So if you're breaking up with me because you think I'm trying to break up with you, that's not a good reason. If you want to break up with me for other reasons, that's fine. But I want to be crystal clear that I'm trying to make this relationship work. I need your help to do it. And if that doesn't work for you, that's fine. I can't make you stay in the relationship. I really want you to, but I can't make you stay. And I'd love it if you'd reconsider and like think it through, or at least like talk to me about why you're doing this. Right? So it's kind of weird. Everyone's telling him, everyone who's listening to this is like, dump his ass. Whereas if he tries to break up with you, I would actually push back, because if you really love him, that's what you should do. And just make sure that it's really what he wants. It's not denying the breakup. It's just not accepting it at face value unless it's an authentic desire to break up. And then if he continues to persist and like spirals downward and stuff like that, and then it's kind of like, okay, fine. Like if that's really what you want, I can't say no. It takes two to make a relationship work, and it's clear to me that you're trying very hard to break up with me, so I guess that's goodbye. I really hope you see a therapist. Does that make sense? So hopefully that kind of language will equip y'all a little bit. And there are just a lot of like, just to kind of summarize, like this is the kind of thing that's tough, because if you're supporting someone with depression, a lot of concepts get tangled up. Like, when does support become enabling behavior, especially when it comes to things like video games and alcohol? When does love absolve people of responsibility and accountability? Because you want to be a good partner, right? You don't want to abandon someone when they're depressed. But in trying to achieve that goal, what you can actually do is like make things worse. And what you've got to understand is that you can be as loving and as supportive as you want to, but in order to fix this relationship, it takes two. And so at some point, there needs to be some kind of accountability. And this is the last kind of tip that I'll give you. This is a good case of someone who should probably stay in therapy. I don't really know, actually, but there's some people that I know that, so there's some people who have this pattern where they fall apart, get depressed, go to therapy, get put back together, and then they feel better, so they stop going to therapy, and the cycle repeats itself. So there's some people who need to stay at least somewhat connected to treatment for a longer period of time. And therapy in this kind of situation is not just to get you out of this depression, it's to really help work at the underlying issues that make you vulnerable to the depression in the first place. There's only so much that you can do, and it takes two to save a relationship. And it's really hard when depression makes it hard for the other person to contribute. So that's where like the key thing is to have them take some kind of responsibility. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it needs to be like very clear. And that could be simple things like cutting back on your gaming. It could be going to see a therapist. It could be, look, what I need from you like is, 1 hour every 3 days at a minimum. Or 2 hours. I want to play games with you like twice a week. And if you're really so sick that you can't do that, that's okay. But I believe that you're not that sick. And if they disagree with you, then that's fine. It's like, Scal, and is this a good situation for couples counseling, or would you recommend individual therapy instead? I can't really make a recommendation that specific because that requires a clinical evaluation, especially on the boyfriend. Right? Because if this really is a bipolar disorder, or major depressive disorder, or things like that, that's where like individual treatment is definitely warranted. Couples counseling on top, I doubt will hurt in any way, shape, or form. But the real question is, my concern in a situation like this is that until we have a real clinical evaluation, we don't know that this is necessarily a relationship problem. This could be an actual diagnostic illness within one partner, which needs to be treated. Here comes V. I believe you're not that sick. Isn't that invalidating? Sure. Question is it true? So this is where I'll just share with y'all something that's a little bit different. So when we were trying to figure out when we were building this coaching program, what are going to be our central values in coaching? When I started streaming, I tried to figure out what are the central values with which I'm showing up on the internet. The 3 values that we decided on are authenticity, compassion, and presence. Not politeness and not validation, not even non-judgmentalness. That's not one of our values here at Healthy Gamer. We believe you should be authentic and compassionate, as opposed to especially falsely validating. So validating is very useful. And I think oftentimes when you are authentic and compassionate, it's very easy to validate. But sometimes I think you need to say things that are like authentic. And that validation, sometimes there are real problems. And like you can validate someone's feelings and perspectives and also hold them accountable. Right? Like and this is what I do with I know it sounds kind of weird, but I have patients who have depression. When they get depressed, it's hard for them to come to appointments. Sometimes they no-show. Right? And so what do I do as a psychiatrist when that happens? So is it forgiven? Sure. But there's also a conversation about it. This is where I approach them and I say, I just need to understand when you're depressed, the least I need is something like a phone call or an email or something. So let me know you're not coming. Or I need to understand, if you don't show up for an appointment, does this mean that I should chase you down and try to schedule you for next week? Or are you going to reach out to me when you're ready to come in? There needs to be a conversation about it. I'm happy to try to support you as best as I can. Also, if we have a standing appointment every Thursday at 4 p.m. and you don't show up 2 weeks in a row and you're not answering my emails, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to show up at Thursday on 4 p.m. and expect that you're there? Or should I wait until you're going to reach out? You can still have conversations and hold people accountable. Right? So that's where as a psychiatrist, it's my job to support people and provide treatment. And it's also their job to accept treatment. Right? They have to do their part. I can't cure someone of their depression. They have to show up. They have to try. So a lot of people think that I do really amazing work. Newsflash, most of the patients that I've worked with who have put their lives together have done 99% of the work. They come and sit with me for 1 hour a week, and they go and live their lives for all of the other hours. And it's what they do in all of those other hours that determines whether they're successful or not. It's not like I'm some miracle worker. Especially people on the internet think I am. But honest to God, 99% of the responsibility of people who put their lives together goes to them. The credit goes to them. I'm like the hostess who seats you at the table. And then you're the one who cooks the food, eats the food, and does everything else. I just point the way. And once people realize that it falls to them. When you hold people accountable and you stop enabling unhealthy behavior, like I'm not saying it's easy, because there certainly is a balance, right? There's like, sometimes I just got to talk to people. Let's just be straight with me. Were you really unable to send an email for 2 weeks? You couldn't like even send me a text or an email. And if you tell me honestly, like I had, my energy was so bad that I could not do that, fine. But the good news is when I ask people that question, like most of the time, they're like, honestly, I screwed up. And that's all I need to hear. It's like, okay, cool. Like, let's at least acknowledge the mistake. It's not like I'm going to fire you from my practice, right? It's just, let's figure out what's the minimum that you can do. And that's what helps. It's helping people understand with depression that there's some responsibility that you can take. And as you take responsibility, what that actually does is empower you. Because if you could have done it last time, that means you can do it next time. And then they do it next time because they have that power. And whereas 1 week ago, the depression was so bad that they didn't send an email, the coming week, it was really bad, but friggin' A, they sent at least one email. And that's how you make progress. And sometimes the validation and enabling can get so severe that we actually disempower people. Oh my God, you can't do anything right. You're so depressed. I'm not going to hold you accountable for anything. That's a terrible idea. Oh my God. And then what happens? The behavior gets worse. So is there compassion? Absolutely. Are there allowances? Absolutely. But there's also authenticity and there's also accountability. So Rhino Gator is saying, I can't take entitled people. I don't know how therapists can put up with this. It's because we're trained to. We understand how to communicate with people who are entitled to help them see things in a different light. Right? It's like, I don't understand how people can play Dota. It's because like the people who play Dota know how to play Dota. We're trained to. And what we want to share with y'all on stream through posts like this is like equipping you with a tiny piece of what we learn. And then our hope is that these kinds of people that you struggle and hate dealing with, you will be more equipped to help these people or deal with them at the least. So someone else is asking, isn't it mentally and emotionally taxing for therapists? Name is unavailable. How do you handle it? So this is interesting. I recently saw a study that showed that helping people with emotionally taxing stuff actually can boost energy. So helping another human being can add energy to your battery. But we do learn how to deal with it. So you just learn on the job. So one thing is to not take your work home with you, which the people that do tend to get torn up. So one of my mentors, brilliant man, once told me going the extra mile for a patient is going a mile too far. And when I first heard that, I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, oh, I'm a doctor. I'm supposed to like save the world and I'm supposed to help them in any way I can, right? Like going the extra mile is what I came here to do. He's like, nope. Going the extra mile is a mile too far. Because every extra mile you don't go as a doctor is a mile that your patient has to go. So everything that you take off of their plate is some amount of deconditioning. So that's where it's like, we're not saying that I won't do 90% of it. Like I'll do 90% of it, but you got to do 10. And then next week it's going to be 80-20, and next week it's going to be 70-30, and next week it's going to be 60-40. Next week it's going to be 50-50. And then we're going to move to 40-60. Was that Dr. Cox from Scrubs, Roof Glenn? Close enough. If I talk to that person again, I'll mention this connection. Roy 50 is saying, what happened to Disco Elysian streams? Love those. I did too. What happened to the Disco Elysium streams is that I think people in our community needed a little bit more help. So that's what we decided to focus on. Doesn't mean we're done with Disco Elysium. I'd love to play it again. Okay, shall we meditate? Okay, one last question. Ryzen is asking, how do you know if you need therapy? Here's the thing. It's not your responsibility to know. So we get this question a lot. How do I know if I need therapy? How do I know if I need to see a doctor? How do I know if I'm depressed? How do I know if I have ADHD? How do I know if I have PTSD? How do I know? So as a layperson, it's not your job to know. The reason you don't know is because you weren't trained to know. That's why the threshold for evaluation should be really low. Right? So it's like, how do I know if I'm healthy? You go get an annual physical. That's how you know you're healthy. It's not something you figure out. It's something that you go to an expert to and have them evaluate. How do you know if you're depressed? Go to a doctor and ask them, hey, I'm trying to figure out if I'm depressed or what's up. And then the doctor's going to be like, great, let me help you with that. By the way, we get trained in all of this diagnosis stuff, right? Half of medical school and residency is about diagnosis. It's in figuring things out, what's wrong and what's not wrong. Pirate OG is asking, can anyone become a Chad? No. No one can become a Chad. You are already a Chad. You can't become that which you are. Easy. All right, what do y'all want to do for meditation? T-pose. Let me think. What can I teach y'all? My voice is a little tired today. What can I teach y'all today? What do we want to meditate? Someone give me. Okay, we can do. Okay, we can do a self-love meditation. Okay, let me think about how to frame this. So I'm going to share with y'all a sankalpa. So sankalpa is translated almost as a resolve or a resolution. So sometimes in meditative practices, we want to implant or cultivate a particular thought or belief about ourselves. And it's not really a belief because beliefs can change like clothes. So cultivating almost an identity for yourself is the purpose of a sankalpa practice. So I'm going to share with y'all a sankalpa. So some of these sankalpas are in Sanskrit and have other kinds of weird energy associated stuff. But I'm going to share with y'all a sankalpa that I found to be very effective for many people, which is simply that I deserve to be whole. So when you're doing certain meditative practices, there are going to be times where your mind is relatively calm, usually towards the end of a meditative practice. And what you can do is repeat that sankalpa 3 times to yourself, verbally or within your mind. So if you're doing a yoga nidra practice, for example, at the end of the practice, you can use that sankalpa, which is, I deserve to be whole. Now, before we go into the details of the practice, I want y'all to understand something about this sankalpa. The sankalpa is not about positivity. The sankalpa is not about getting rid of negativity. So it's not about trying to balance negativity with positivity. What it actually is about is encompassing the whole thing. That what you deserve is to be whole. You don't deserve to be perfect. You don't deserve to be flawless. You don't deserve just joy. That what you deserve in life is all of it, right? That you deserve a whole experience of life. And so this is where some of the negativity that you give to yourself, you actually don't deserve. What you deserve is to be whole. So you deserve a piece of the negativity, sure. You're not supposed to have a perfect, flawless, easy life. But a lot of what you take away from yourself, or a lot of what you don't allow yourself to have, is actually something you deserve. That, do you deserve some amount of pain in life? Absolutely. But you also deserve pleasure. Do you deserve some amount of hardship? Absolutely. But you also deserve a break from now and then, right? Like, you deserve all of it. And oftentimes when we struggle with self-love, what happens is we get so lopsided where we don't believe that we deserve the entirety of it. What we actually say to ourselves is we only deserve a piece of it. So what we're going to do today is a meditation around this concept, and specifically to tee you up for that sankalpa. You don't necessarily have to use that sankalpa. If that resonates with you, I encourage you to give it a shot. Generally speaking, we want to use sankalps for somewhere between 6 months and 1 year at a minimum. So this is where I've been using particular sankalpas for, let me think about this, 19 years. So sankalpa only grows over time. Okay? So this is where, so just think about it, and let's just sort of use that one for now. Okay? So I want you to sit up straight, back straight, neck straight, spine straight. Close your eyes. And take a moment to center yourself. Centering of the self usually involves focusing on a particular thing. So you can feel your weight, the weight of your body in the chair. You can notice your breathing. Take a moment to just let all of the thoughts from our conversation, from your day, kind of like drift away. We're going to start by not engaging with our thoughts and focusing on something like the breath. And now what I want you to do is think about a harsh self-judgment. So you can do this practice when you notice yourself in a negative, toxic state of mind. Or you can do this practice when you're relatively calm and sort of work on that piece of you externally. But start by thinking about some way in which you beat yourself up. So try to recall the thoughts that you have, the feelings that you have. And be careful, because if your mind starts to justify the belief, you can sort of acknowledge those thoughts and those justifications, that evidence. But we don't want to start going down that road. We want to sort of keep a window between us and those negative thoughts. And we're just looking inside at them. And now notice why you believe these things about yourself. Notice all of the truth that your mind comes up with. But then what I want you to notice is that this truth is just what your mind comes up with. You may believe these things about yourself, but that too is just a belief. Now return to your breath for a moment and notice the reality of the breath. How clear and present it is. It's not a thought, it's an experience. And now from this foundation, return back to your toxic thoughts. And now from this place of centeredness, from this place that is grounded, you can offer compassion to your negative self. You can say to yourself in this moment that the beliefs and the conclusions that you came to do have some kind of anchoring in reality, right? Because those events did happen to you. Maybe you did make mistakes. Maybe harsh words were spoken. There's an element of that that's real. But notice that the way that your mind thinks about it, it assumes a certain completeness. That because you went through a breakup, you will be alone for the rest of your life. That because you haven't dated yet, you will be alone for the rest of your life. Notice how it draws these conclusions. And while it may be grounded in reality, there may be a seed of reality, but the tree itself is imaginary. And also, your critical mind may want to slip into blaming itself for that. Even the minds may say, oh, see how foolish I am. I can't even think straight. Notice that too. See how reflexive it is. See how quickly you devalue yourself. Even in this practice, the mind can find a foothold. All we want you to do is notice it. And even if a portion of it is true, acknowledge to yourself that you deserve more than that. That in life, you deserve the pain and the pleasure. You deserve hardship and a lucky break. That some of what may have happened to you may have been unfair. And that there may be things that have happened to you that you don't deserve. And notice that when you feel these negative thoughts, your heart feels tight. It constricts. It hurts. So I want you to open it up. Open up your heart to everything that you deserve, to the fullness of life, to making mistakes and being able to forgive yourself, to having bad luck, but still being able to hope for good luck. For noticing all of your weaknesses and also acknowledging that the person who exists right now is incredibly resilient. Because look at what you've gone through. And you're still here. and appreciate the resilience of your body and your mind despite your negative thoughts. How even despite swirling around in negativity, you're doing this practice now. And that practice is born of a hope, of a desire, of even reclaiming the life that you deserve. And now repeat to yourself 3 times in your mind or out loud, I deserve to be whole. I deserve to be whole. And I deserve to be whole. And really try to feel that in your heart. That everything life has sent you and everything that it will send you is going to be a complete picture. It'll be joys and sorrows, villains and heroes, black and white. And allow yourself a little bit more of the whiteness. Allow yourself less darkness and more light. Allow yourself more compassion and more forgiveness. And we'll end the practice with a namaskar. Put your hands together. And whatsoever you can be grateful for in this moment. Notice one thing that you can be grateful for. And acknowledge that and give gratitude. Don't eat the juice. This was so uncomfortable. My body is hurting. I'm crying and my breath is shorter. I love meditation, but I don't think this kind was for me. Okay. Well, that wasn't expected, but it may not be for you yet. Itchy. So a lot of people are crying. Okay, well, that's okay, right? So like meditation is when we let things out. So it's okay. You don't have to cry. For those of you that almost cried, it's not like crying is the goal, despite what many people think, but it's okay to feel, right? It's okay to let yourself feel, and hopefully tears of joy and love, and almost sorrow that maybe you haven't been treating yourself this way. So do this practice. The tears will eventually run their course, and then hopefully you'll be left with more of that calm warmth, right? I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this, but you know, when you haven't seen someone that you love for a while, there's a certain desperation to the first hug. There's a certain hungriness to that first meeting when you haven't seen someone that you love in a long time. And the first hug you give them is like hungry. And then as you spend time with them, the hugs that you give them change. Then it becomes a thing of joy as opposed to filling something that's absent. So if you cry during meditation or something like that, that's just this process. You've been hungry to connect with yourself in this way for a long time. And it's totally fine to do that. And it doesn't mean that you're going to continue to do that. And at some point, the hug will just be a joy. There'll be nothing missing that you're making up for. And that's when meditation will truly lead you to peace. So Ramadino is saying, we're crying because it's hard for us to believe we deserve more. Beautiful statement. We're crying because it's hard for us to believe we deserve more. The reason you're crying is precisely correct, that it's hard for you to believe, but you do know it. That's why there are tears. It's an acknowledging how hard it is to believe. We're not saying that you're crying because you don't believe it. You're crying because in this moment, you actually realize that you do deserve it, and you see how hard it is for you to believe. That's the sadness. Because you do know that it's true, but it's hard to believe. So keep doing the practice. Remember that the goal of meditation is not a particular event during an episode of meditation. The real goal of meditation is to do the practice over and over and over and over and over again. If it resonates with you emotionally or cognitively, fantastic. Then you can do that. If not, you can try something else. That's why we teach a lot of different meditations. And keep at it. Who are we rating? What is the name of this meditation? I don't know. Rate yourself. Esfand? Josh Strife Hayes. I've never heard of that person. So let's see. I didn't mean to offend anyone with that, but .com/. Who is it? Strive Hayes. Oh. Man, I am just not very competent at typing today. It's an interesting. Oh, what's the? I just see ended. Okay, yeah, I can cross mouse. What is this? Okay, this is an epilepsy warning, so we're not going to raid someone who has an epilepsy warning. Okay. It's not that we don't appreciate the raver, but okay. Okay, well, let's raid small Sam Talks. Oh, no. Crap. Okay, hold on. Let me see. Nope. I'm still logged out. Hold on. Let me figure this out. Oh, Sweet Anita? No, well, hold on. I'm so confused, chat. How do I? Okay, we can raid Anita. That's fine. Let me figure out edit stream info, clip, 60-second raid channel. Here we go. Sweet Anita. Okay, we'll raid Anita. All right, take care. Y'all want to do small streamer? You want to do Dota or no Dota? How many viewers does Insania have? 800. Okay, we can raid. We'll do Dota. Fine. Okay. We'll raid Insania. Team Liquid. Fine. Whatever y'all want. I was going to raid Anita, but okay, we'll raid Anita next time. Take care, everyone.